All right. Good afternoon. My name is Jeff Harrison. Welcome to Your Personal Health with Dr. Michael Kim and Dr. Krista Burris. Dr. Kim and Burris, welcome. How are you guys doing?
Doing good, Jeff. How are you?
I'm doing well. Hey, I'm excited about today's topic, which is has to do with processed foods. But before we get into that, you over on COVID-19 update, we ran a little bit late over there, but it was very important. Maybe just a real quick recap. I had a couple of questions about that, but you were talking about the whole Delta variant now is really starting to rear its ugly head, and we're starting to see some things like more hospitalizations, faster or larger, R value, which means its spreadability. Tell us a little bit about that, if you will.
Well, what we're seeing is a significant increase in both our positivity rates on our tests in the local area. Those have doubled from about 5% to 11% just this week, as well as the number of hospitalizations. And we think also positive tests. Anecdotally, we've been seeing a lot of positive tests, but we're no longer receiving the daily numbers from the county, so it's a little unclear. But this is due to the Delta variant, which has been here in Riverside County for several weeks. They did identify it, and we do believe that it's responsible for the rapid increase in cases. And the average age of the people being hospitalized is coming down. They're actually younger people. And then they are by far and away unvaccinated or only partially vaccinated. So if you only receive one dose of Pfizer or Moderna vaccine, you don't have great protection. Even with two doses, your protection is probably around 60 to 70%. But with only one dose, you're not really well protected. So if you're someone who's only gotten one dose, it's a great time to go out and get that second dose. Even if it's been a couple months, it's still okay to just go get that second dose.
Right. And then we also talked about how all the data we know is based on the alpha and beta variant. And so we really can only make small inferences of, well, if it's more virulent, maybe 6 feet can be, to 10 feet or 12. We don't know that, right? Or do we keep it at 6 feet? So it's unfortunate that with this new variant, we have to see what occurs and make best guesses in terms of, but at least we know what to do, because if we don't do as what we were doing before, we know that this is a more virulent one, that it's probably not as wise to do less.
Yeah.
But
And just again, anecdotally, the doctors who are handling this variant in the South right now are seeing that their patients are getting sicker and progressing faster to need ventilators, as well as to unfortunately passing away. And so this one, we should take it seriously. But the good news is the vaccines are still really good at preventing severe disease from this.
Just a couple of follow-ups. You said if you've had the single shot, go get one right away. Secondly, those of us who've had both shots, we're seeing that that's not as resistant to this new Delta strain. Are there any things coming down the line? Are you starting to hear things coming through the back channels of maybe we should send those people back for a third shot?
There's a lot of discussion. The drug companies would love for us to all get another shot. So they, of course, have come down quite positively on that idea. The CDC is dragging its feet on the recommendation officially because they don't have enough data to say, yes, that's necessary. The two-shot regimens and the Johnson & Johnson one-shot regimen are still very good at preventing hospitalizations and death.
Hmm.
If they aren't as good at preventing mild disease. So what we don't know is whether we're going to see a need for a booster shot maybe this fall. But the studies to answer that question are in process right now, and hopefully we'll actually have some clearer guidelines in the next month.
right. And then we've already know that you can get like flu and COVID.
Yeah.
And so with flu season coming, I'm hoping that people don't also think about, well, I already got my COVID shot. I don't need to get my flu shot. They're very different things. And so um, I think there's that uh, hump to get over as well.
Before we get into today's topic of processed foods, which I can't wait to get in there and work through that, you talked about potentially the surge is going to be higher, and one of the factors there is the fact that, and I was surprised not having children. You said, hey, we're only 2 to 3 weeks away from the kids going back to school, and those are probably the age group. Stop me if I'm wrong, but they're probably the age group that is being probably more susceptible to this new strain. And there's really no protocol right now. They're probably anxious to get the kids back in school, and yet, is 6 feet far enough? No masks, no social distancing. Are we looking at a potential big surge in the fall, in your estimation?
I think if things go the way they seem to be right now, we're going to see a big surge in the pediatric population because they are quite unprotected. They cannot yet be vaccinated, and they had fairly low rates of COVID infection last year because most of them were sort of protected at home. So this is a naive population, a population that hasn't seen virus, hasn't seen vaccine, and we're putting them back into the classroom. And not only have we relaxed some of the masking guidelines, we've even decreased the distancing guidelines. So that used to be 6 feet, and now we say, oh, okay, well, maybe 3 feet's okay if you can't do 6. But again, that was all before the Delta variant and based on the original strain. And we were thinking, well, we're probably okay with 3. But now that we have a more transmissible virus, that might not be so smart.
Yeah, I suspect if we look over the time, there'll be some breakout in terms of small kids, and then elementary school, and then high schools, and then young adults in terms of who's more susceptible. I don't think they're all equally as susceptible. But who knows, because the Delta variant could break that mold, and that's what the Alpha variant was more. Less, with the younger and more with the older kids. But
Okay, well, we've got to keep an eye on that. If you haven't been staying in tune with the COVID-19 update, because we're thinking, hey, it's over. I mean, I even saw, not that I was heavily watching TikTok, but I did see a TikTok video, and it was a little bit of it was a comedian, and that said, hey, it's over, and everybody hug, and it's not. I mean, we're seeing things happen where concerts open, large gatherings are back, big events are back. I see golf tournaments, no restriction. I just saw the Wimbledon over the weekend, and as the week went on, we saw the okay to bring in higher percentage of the crowd kept getting bigger and bigger. And yet in Tokyo, we saw them shut down any spectators to the Olympics. So it's not over, gang. It's not over. So thank you guys for being so diligent and really staying on top of this and keeping us aware. That hey, we still have to do our part. It's no time to toss away the masks and put down that 6-foot ruler. It's we probably need to keep that a little closer than we anticipate. So thank you all so much. Well, let's dive into today's topic, because this is called Your Personal Health. And today I want to talk about processed food. Now, last week, our conversation was, should we diet first or should we exercise first? And the answer was, that depends. So go back and watch that, because the reason it depends is not buried, but it's clearly explained in last week's show, or that show, and we'll link it up in the description here. But this week I want to talk about processed foods, because let's face it, it almost is easier for mom and dad to grab something on the way home from the drive-through, and quite frankly, sometimes it's cheaper than it is to say, hey, let's go to the shopping center, let's get some fresh vegetables and whatnot. But I think the first question is, what does processed foods mean?
So, processed foods is sort of a generic term, but it means anytime you take a food from its original state and you alter it, usually by adding something, by applying heat, or changing the temperature of the food, or changing some kind of state. So either removing something, adding something, or drying it, that sort of thing. And the interesting thing about processing is some forms of processing food don't really change its nutritional value much, whereas other forms of processing food really alter the nutritional value and the properties of the food. So not all processing is bad, but some of it can be problematic for us.
Well, when we talk about processed food, when you say changing its state, so I'll use an example here. I'm not a big consume. Okay, maybe I do consume some of these, but when we take a potato out of the ground and we turn it into French fries, how bad is that for us?
Well, in this case, you've taken a potato and you've applied heat. So when you apply heat to a potato, you might alter some of its nutritional value a little bit, but not too much. So the actual cooking of the potato or adding heat to the potato is a form of processing that doesn't really do too many bad things.
Mm.
But this is the same application of heat that you might get from boiling a potato or baking a potato. And in this case, we're talking about French fries, so they're fried. So then we have the processing of adding the oil.
Mm.
And that's where we get into part of the processing of the food that's problematic. There are some types of oils that are worse for us than others. The types of oils that are really, really bad for our arteries and clog them up the most is called trans fats. And those are things that are found in a lot of the really cheap oils that are used to fry. And the second worst fat for us are called saturated fats. And these are things that are found in animal fats, so like lard, bacon
Mm.
grease, that kind of thing. Those also clog up our arteries, but it turns out they're not quite as bad for us as the margarine like trans fats. These things are just like evil. And so, um, the type of fats that are actually helpful are fats that are really high in omega-3 fatty acids. And so these are things like um, oily fish fats. So things like tuna and salmon have these in them. Most of us don't want our French fries fried in salmon fat, because that probably wouldn't be
I haven't honestly tried that, but I just did in my mind, and I had to agree with you. I probably don't want that.
But
Uh,
um, one step down from that would be frying in an oil like an olive oil or a safflower or canola oil that's a little healthier, avoids the trans fats, avoids the saturated fats. But honestly, avoiding the oil altogether would be better. And so there are other ways to make your fries crispy. You can use an air fryer or you can even bake them. And these are choices that you can do at home a lot easier than you do when you run through a fast
mm.
food uh, establishment, because they usually don't give you an option. It's deep fryer or nothing. And I guarantee you they're not using the expensive oil.
Yeah.
And then they also need to change the food by preserving it longer because some places are pretty good at, like In and Out, they'll cut it right there. So, it hasn't been frozen for 20 days. But those places that do that, they have to make sure that the quality is good. So they have to change the food by preserving it in some way. And
Mm.
that also can affect the healthiness.
Correct. So Not all, but some French fries are, they actually add preservatives to them to extend their shelf life. They also freeze them. But sometimes they add extra chemicals to them to maintain their color. Um, Also, they'll sometimes play around with chemistry to kind of get a fry that has the texture they're looking for. So there's quite a bit of food science that goes into making a French fry. And a lot of that food science is kind of cool, but it turns out that it adds a lot of extra things to our food that we probably don't need.
So does that fall under that whole umbrella of processed foods, everything you just discussed?
Yes, absolutely. And then the last thing that we get an extra dose of with processed foods is salt. So
Mm,
you know that French fries taste better with a little salt, but most of the time we get a lot of salt. um,
exactly.
so
But salt used to be a really good preservative back in the day when you had to, keep foods for a while. So,
That
yeah, it's
is
still used for that.
Yeah, that is something that I know that whenever my wife will look at something, she'll say, "Do you see how much salt there or sodium is in there?" She said, "It's incredible." She said, "We don't want that." Because it kind of exceeds that. It's like, did we really need that? Or is it just saying, it has a shelf life of a millennia, instead of we're gonna consume it right now. So that's something to be aware of. But when we talk about processed foods, what impact do processed foods have on our health?
They have several impacts. One is that they tend to remove nutrients that were originally in the food during the processing procedures.
Mm,
So the vitamin content or the fiber content of a food may go down. So the healthiness of that food for you has decreased, especially with fresh fruits and vegetables. Um, the more they're processed and the longer they sit around, the less nutritious they become.
mm,
A caveat to this is vegetables that are freshly picked and immediately washed and, say, frozen are actually better for you than a fresh vegetable that just spent a couple weeks getting to you.
wow.
So, even though technically it's a more processed food, it just depends, and you kind of have to pay attention to what kind of food you're buying. If you're buying frozen vegetables that are technically minimally processed, they've just been harvested, cleaned, and frozen, those are pretty good.
Mm,
If you take something like whole wheat that's been um, processed down to a white flour and then made into a cake, that's something that now has lost a lot of its original B vitamins, it's lost its fiber, and now it's really just a basic carbohydrate. So, really,
mm,
more like a sugar. The other thing that happens with processed foods is in order to make them more palatable, to make them taste better, and to make them a little more addictive, they will add sugar.
mm.
They add sugar to foods that you didn't expect. They actually add sugar to French fries.
Oh, really?
Yes. And so this is something that most of us wouldn't suspect because they taste salty. But the sugar's been added to make them actually trigger the dopamine reward cycle in our brain to make us want them. So it's sneaky and it's mean to us, but they do it anyway.
Wow. I'm glad you brought up sugar. We're going to talk about that next week because it is something that is just, as you say, it's addictive, but it has some really bad side effects on our brain and our body. And I can't wait to talk about that next week. But so when we talk about the impact of processed foods, it doesn't sound like then it's really just robbing us of nutritional value. Is that probably the most impact that we see?
Yeah, and I think that um, it adds a lot of extra stuff we don't want, which is
Mm,
the salt, saturated fat, and some of the preservatives. Takes away the nutritional value and tends to increase the calories the food. And they increase the portion sizes. So it's sort of a sort of lose-lose for us. If we're
Yeah.
trying to eat healthy, if we're trying to sort of move to a diet that's a little better for us, processed foods are a major tripping point. So I'm still a fan of having them every now and then if you crave them. But the less you have of them in your diet, the less you want them. And after you haven't eaten them for a while, most people find that when they taste them again, they don't taste as good as they remembered.
I
Is it?
think sorry, I was going to say, I think with the processed food though, one of the big reasons people go to them is they're convenient, right?
Yeah.
It's quicker to roll through somewhere. It's quicker to pop a can open and put it in the pot. But I think that's a fallacy, right? I don't think it's quite, oh, it's so easy and the other way is so hard. It does take a little bit of prep, but I think if you can build the habit, I think it can be just as quick and convenient. So.
And I'm a fan of minimally processed foods. So these are things that are made a little more convenient for you to make it easier for you to use them. Think of a pre-packaged bag of salad, or maybe a frozen meal that's a bunch of vegetables together and you add your own meat or protein. These are ways to take advantage of some of the convenience factor of the processed food while avoiding some of the negative health features of some processed food.
So like often we would have a bag of frozen fruit, and we would use that to create our smoothies.
Right.
So because it was a temperature change, it's considered processed food, right? But
Right.
they're just, they're organic or whatever, but they were flash frozen apparently.
Right.
And so we're probably better off doing something like that. Well,
Exactly.
with that in mind, how about all these processed meals or all these meals that we see, whether it's, you name it, Jenny Craig or, Bill Blasio, whatever, and you're buying all these packaged foods to try to lose weight. It sounds like there's almost a catch-22, but they're working, but aren't those also preserved and aren't those also processed
Yeah,
in
I
general?
think in general, if you look at the ingredient list and you don't recognize anything, that tells you what you need to know about that product, that it's mostly made in a lab. Um, that doesn't mean that those types of foods can't be useful for people in certain circumstances. But I would say that as a long-term solution, it's probably not going to be the way most people choose to eat.
Yeah.
So I'm never going to tell someone, hey, if you found something that's working for you, you shouldn't do it. But I would say that long term, people are probably going to want to transition to eating more real food and work away from the processed food for most of their diet. It may be that that person ends up using that as a tool, say for breakfast, or say at lunch at work where they don't have the ability to prepare their food, or maybe they don't have a way to store it at work. So those things can be useful, but in general shouldn't be your long-term plan for your whole meal plan.
Yeah, I would say, sticking to the food analogy, that's kind of like baby milk in the sense that if that's where you stay, you're never going to get the real benefits, where it's a place to start, but learn how to then, like Dr. Burris said, use real foods in a minimally processed way and add your proteins, and then you're getting the most bang for your buck, and you're still able to use those other processed foods, although they're healthier, in spot situations, like you said. And then you're now moving on to solid foods in the metaphor. So.
Well, I have a little follow-up question is, what impact do processed food, or excuse me, here it is. It's scrolling along the bottom. How do our bodies process processed food versus organic or non-processed foods? Is there a different process in our body? I'm sorry to overuse the word process, but is there a different way we handle those foods?
Um, Kind of not. So our body doesn't know whether a molecule of fat came from an organic piece of grass-fed beef or whether it came from a McDonald's hamburger. So all it knows is it's dealing with a molecule of fat. So in that way, our body processes things the same. It's just that what we're giving it, if you're feeding a highly processed food, you're giving it different Legos to unpack,
Mm.
basically. If you're feeding yourself food that's less processed, you're not going to give it as many pesticides to unpack. You're not going to give it as many trans fats to deal with. And that's sort of the benefit of it. Organic is a term that's very specific. It means that food has to be grown in a certain way without pesticides. But the term natural means almost nothing at all. Like
Mm.
anybody can use that term. So sometimes the labeling on foods can be a little confusing. And I always recommend if you're in a store and you're like, hey, is this better than this? Just Google, what does this mean?
Mm.
And you may be surprised that you're looking at the same product just labeled two different ways, but
Wow.
one's more expensive.
Last question. All processed foods bad for us? And over time, has our body evolved biologically to adapt to some of these food changes?
Sadly, we haven't adapted very well at all to this food change. And that's probably why we have such a problem with obesity and diabetes in our world, is primarily because we are still designed to function on a different kind of diet. And yet our modern diet, which is very high in processed foods, very high in fat, and very high in sugar, is not gelling well with the way our bodies are supposed to function. So we're ending up with some health problems from that. Um,
When you say health problems, are we talking about like now we see a rise, if you will, in like lactose intolerant or gluten free, their intolerance of gluten free or those kind of things?
the primary health problems that we're seeing from the combination of our modern diet and the fact that we're more sedentary overall is a rise in obesity, high blood pressure, and diabetes. And then there is also a concomitant rise in certain cancers that are
Mm.
associated with this, such as colon cancer. We're also seeing uh, increase in inflammatory disease, and there's some interest in whether maybe a lot of our autoimmune diseases are also driven by our diets and environment. That association is a little more tenuous than our obesity, high blood pressure, and diabetes. Those are a pretty straight line. So
Mm.
we can be pretty confident that it's our modern lifestyle that's the contributor to the huge increase in those. Those diseases were basically extremely rare 100 years ago.
When you talked earlier, you talked about some of the foods that are bad for us, and they're sneaking in some sugar or whatever it might be. You know, it seems to me like if these conditions were that bad for us, wouldn't we also try to ban it like we ban cigarettes or alcohol to a certain age? Are, do you see any people out there doing this when it comes to food as well?
Oh, sure. There's all sorts of efforts to try to legislate an improvement for our nutrition, and they've pretty much hit brick walls.
Mm.
Probably the most famous of those is the New York City ban on soda size. Like, I think they banned soda over 32 ounces or something like that. So you couldn't buy a 64-ounce super bagel, you know. And we've seen some other attempts in, say, some of our food assistance programs, the school lunch programs, to limit food choices somewhat to healthier options. There's been a concerted effort to take flavored milk off the school menus. These are things like strawberry milk and chocolate milk, and only offer low-fat regular milk. But as far as I know, that hasn't gone over well because people prefer chocolate milk. And so sadly, we haven't made much progress on that front.
Well, today, by the way, those of you watching, we've been talking about processed foods and what does it mean? How do we deal with it in our body? Is it good or bad? And I think this has helped clear the air on processed food, that not all processed food means it's bad. Sometimes it is as simple as, and Dr. Burris, correct me if I'm wrong, is it could be a change in temperature, and flash freezing some vegetables and then thawing them out later may not be such a bad play. And as you said, minimally processed food is very good. I love that whole idea of and my wife does it all the time. She buys that pre-washed and packaged salad mixes. And to me, I'm thinking, okay, they've just washed it. How bad could it be? You know, and instead of having to buy those heads of lettuce and then put it together. So I like that idea, and this has been very, very informative. If you missed the beginning of it, I think it's important for you to go back and listen to that and talk about when I was okay. So I was kind of probably prying about my own personal favorite, the French fry, and because sometimes it gets a bad rap, and it has earned a little bit of a bad rep, but there are some other ways. I've noticed my wife, she loves, and I equally love eating them, baking those fries. And you're right, they come out nice and crispy. And I'll tell you what, sweet potato fries, oh my gosh, my mouth is watering thinking about it. So there are some answers, but go back and watch that. Next week, we're going to talk about sugar. And because you surprised me when you said it's even in our French fries, that it's everywhere. And I think I started maybe 7 or 8 years ago noticing the education process. I was seeking out, hey, what does sugar do to our body? It's not all good, gang. It's not all good. So especially to our brains. And after just losing a friend to Parkinson's, and I know that, she stage 5 Parkinson's disease, and I saw her go downhill. She ate a lot of sugar. I just be honest with you. She tried her best, but she ate a lot of sugar, and I don't know if that exacerbated it. It was something that was in her genes. I don't know, but it just heightened my awareness of being careful. So next week, Dr. Burris, I'd love to dive into the impacts of sugar. What does it mean? How can we identify it? Are there some good sources? What is our recommended daily allowance? Is there such a thing? And really, on the show, Your Personal Health, give you the guidance to live optimally. Dr. Burris, thank you so much for joining us today. I see Dr. Kim dashed out. They do have a real-life business, folks. They own Coachella Valley Direct Primary Care. And by the way, their information is going across the screen right now. It is they do things differently. It's not your typical, hey, they went to college, they did their residency, now they have an office, and you just come in and it's, you're seeing 2,000 and 3,000 patients on their list. It's much different. Dr. Burris, would you just explain just for a second, and then I'll let you go, what is different about Coachella Valley Direct Primary Care over a regular physician's office at Direct Primary Care?
So direct primary care is a model of healthcare where the doctor has a direct relationship with the patient. So we are more like a gym membership, honestly, than a traditional insurance-based doctor. Our patients join the practice and they pay a monthly membership fee. And for that, they're a patient of ours and they can access care, same-day visits, they can do televisits, they can text us, and there are no additional fees over that for our services. If we need to send somebody outside, then we'll utilize their insurance if they have it, or find a good price for them. But our services are covered by that monthly fee. So no matter how many times people need to come in or see us or call us or text us, we do not charge copays or anything like that. And I love it. It's a way to have a relationship where I answer to the patient, and my only concern is trying to do the right thing for that patient rather than being distracted by what I need to do to make the insurance company happy, etc.
It truly is a game changer. My wife and I both joined their program. I don't know how long ago, six or 8 months ago. It's, since COVID, I've kind of lost track of time, but it's been a while. And I'll tell you what, there's been a couple of instances where you guys have gone above and beyond, where it just, it's like that's never happened in my time on this big green blob in the middle of the universe that I've been taken care of so well. So I really, really recommend them. But Dr. Burris, thank you so much. I know you're busy, and I just want to wish you the best. And we'll see you next week. Make sure to let people know, hey, COVID is not over yet. There's a new strain out there called the Delta variant. I think it's Delta variant 1. Is it?
Yeah, there's Delta Plus and Delta. And right now we're seeing Delta in the United States.
Yeah, gang, these are not flight miles with Delta. That's a different program. Different program. This is stuff that you're seeing some surges, 4,000 or 5,000 this past week here in California. Is that correct?
Yeah, we're starting to see numbers of 5,000 a day. We were less than 1,000.
Oh, that's a day. That's not a week. That's a day. Holy
Yeah.
cow. All right. I know we're a big state, but still that number was very, very low before that hit, correct?
Correct. We were a week, like the beginning of July, we were at 900 cases a day.
Wow. So it's not over. Let's be safe. Maybe you want to pull out those masks or get some new masks and keep that distance, and maybe reconsider those larger events just for a little while longer. And let's get past this, and let's just play it smart and play it safe. Until next week, my name is Jeff Harrison, and you're with Personal Health with Dr. Michael Kim and Krista Burris. Dr. Krista Burris, thank you, doctor. We'll see you next week.
Sounds good.
All right. Bye-bye.